Good evening, everyone. You can hear me well? Excellent. You got to be okay. Maybe I'll bring it closer. How's that? Okay. Um, Thank you, George, for inviting me. And in the brief conversation I've had with Tony about the Intentional Endowment Network, it's been good to get a recap on how the day has been and what you're looking forward to tomorrow. Hopefully tonight you'll get a couple of examples of how we at the University of California have looked at sustainable investing and addressing a number of these types of questions that you've talked about through the course of the day, and certainly we'll continue to discuss through the end of this conference. It's been a journey to understand sustainable investing for me, and really what I am hoping, as I was thinking about tonight, was sharing with you what this journey has been and how we got here. But most importantly, this is a dialogue more than a journey as well, because the journey gets shaped by the people you interact with and the conversations you have along the way. So I'd like to certainly acknowledge my own colleagues here tonight from the University of California, but also the broad California state system, Cal Poly, SF State, and Sonoma State. And I want to thank particularly the Intentional Endowments Network for the great work that you're doing in getting now up to about 95 members and the critical mass to have these types of conversations so that people can get together to share their experiences and create their own unique individual journeys, because that's really what this is all about. And as I thought about tonight, it really gave me a chance to, I mean, it's easy to say yes to these things, but to do justice, you have to really sit back and say, what has our journey been, and take stock of the things that have led us to where we are today. And particularly what I've learned about sustainability over the last 2.5 to 3 years. So before getting right into some of these observations, let me start by acknowledging two near and dear friends and colleagues I have in the audience tonight. Amy Myers-Jaffe at the table over there. She's my senior advisor on energy and sustainability, and frankly, a lot of the thinking that I have embraced and adopted in the ideas that we are implementing have come from listening to Amy and dialoguing and debating with Amy around what does it mean to think about traditional oil and gas energy assets and their relationship and their changing relationship with the financial markets in the world. And so that's been very helpful to me as we've been thinking about figuring out what is our own investment strategy going to be around not just sustainability, but real assets as we think more broadly. In addition to Amy, my colleague to the left, Wendell, from UC Irvine, in fact, just literally as we were driving here, I saw the announcement from the university administration that after a very, very successful time as being the head for administration and business services at UC Irvine, Wendell's taking on a new role in short order as the Associate Chancellor for Sustainability at UC Irvine. And Wendell, congratulations. The good news is now you have to do one job instead of two. And in addition to not only leading this effort at UC Irvine, Wendell has been the co-chair for our Global Leadership Climate Council that helps shape the strategy at 10 campuses, 5 medical centers, 3 national labs covering the broad UC system. That's not a small feat when you think about the fact that we are 250,000 students, 250,000 plus faculty and staff. You think about the fact that we have a $26 billion operating budget every year, and out of that operating budget, we spend on traditional energy, oil, natural gas, and other sources, over $1 billion annually. And to try and think about evolving our energy mix is an important challenge, and certainly also a very important opportunity to embrace as the University of California. But right from the get-go, Wendell's been, I know we've shared many emails and conversations around, here's a good idea for you to think about, here's an opportunity, here's somebody you should talk to. And that dialogue continues to help shape my own thinking as we've evolved through this journey. Of course, everything starts with a very strong leader, and under the leadership of President Janet Napolitano, the University of California is taking direct action to decarbonize our campus energy supplies. It really is a comprehensive effort, and it does speak to her commitment and the commitment of the University of California to lead on climate change. Since 2015, the University of California Office of the Chief Investment Office of the President, has been running its own electricity company to supply power to many of our facilities. And UC's first utility-scale solar power plant will be inaugurated this month, and it'll supply close to 14% of the total UC system demand that we have for electricity. And the second plant is going to be coming online later this year. We've also signed an agreement to supply carbon-neutral landfill biomethane to the university, in addition to constructing an anaerobic digester to transform our agricultural waste and food processing waste into biomethane. So 14% may look like a small number, but when you start thinking about all these solutions, 14% continues to grow. And that growth is important to us because we have set a goal under the leadership of President Napolitano to be carbon neutral by 2025. That is not a long time from today. I mentioned these specific achievements to you tonight because they really are what set the context for the Office of the Chief Investment Officer, which is where I work. We're an integral part of the university. And if there is one message I can leave you with tonight, is that endowments should not be operating as isolated divisions of their universities. Endowments should be an integral part of the university that they are part of. Our endowment, and we get mixed sometimes with just being an endowment, but let me give you a little bit of a sense of how we operate at the Office of the CIO. We have the privilege to manage our defined benefit plan, which is about $54 billion. We manage our retirement savings program for about 300,000 people that save voluntarily in the University of California retirement savings program. That's about $20 billion. And then we manage the working capital that fuels the operations of our 10 campuses, 5 medical centers, 3 national labs. That's about $14 billion. In addition to that, we also manage the endowment for the University of California. The endowment is now, as of June 30th, $9.1 billion. So collectively, we manage the balance sheet, which is about $100 billion for the University of California. And so when we have to think about sustainability, we think about it not just in the context of the endowment, but in the context of the balance sheet of the University of California and all the assets we manage for our students, our staff, our faculty, and ultimately the future generations that we're responsible for. So when I think about tonight, I really want to focus on 3 particular things. One is, what have I learned over the past couple of years? Secondly, how did we put these learnings into actions at the Office of the Chief Investment Officer? And then lastly, but not least, and this is probably what keeps Amy and I most engaged in our conversations right now, is around the question of this pressing question about, what is our investment strategy going to be for real assets? And how do these questions around real assets intersect with sustainability? The markets over the last year, and particularly even over the last couple of years, have presented us with a large number of surprises. The oil price collapse, and I know tonight we have in our midst someone from Saudi Arabia who came in early this morning, and so it is important that I keep him awake through this conversation tonight, and hopefully engage him in the Q&A session. But thank you for making a trip. It certainly speaks to the testament of the importance of the conversations you're having to get the attention as far out in Saudi Arabia. But you've had a slowdown in China. You've had Brexit. We've had so-called hedge funds and all kinds of other funds collapse over the last year. So what I'd like to talk about is my experience approaching sustainability in a more systemic fashion and how it gave the University of California a more holistic framework to think about those kinds of dramatic events. Now, I know the word sustainability often means different things to different people, and indeed our host, the Intentional Endowments Network, brings an interesting word with their choice of the term intentional to the dialogue about environmental, social, and governance factors, ESG, as they are related to in investing. Now, looking at the dictionary or the Wikipedia definition of intentional is done in a way that is planned or intended. Perhaps many of our peers are, in fact, not delving into ESG-related activities out of intention. Much of what I see happening in this space is reactive. In some cases, boards are looking for solutions to respond to student demands. But just reacting to student calls for divestment with a yes or no answer is missing the opportunity that can be gained from a more systematic consideration of sustainable investing. So my number one takeaway from my journey into sustainable investing is that it is important to embrace the issue in a proactive fashion. I learned that sustainability is not a singular binary action. Divest or don't divest. It is a cultural shift. We had this conversation earlier, Tony, but it really is fundamentally a cultural shift. Sustainable investing is not a policy as much as it is a way of thinking. And as a way of thinking, it cannot be implemented by adding a director of sustainability or a department of sustainability experts. It requires integration across your products, across your product teams, and across your entire organization. So let me share this warning with you. However, learning about sustainability is a very time-consuming activity. It has taken our office many months, quarters, in fact years, to incorporate sustainability into the leadership process. It is a pretty serious commitment. That answer might not be appealing to boards because it's not a singular action, but we come from academic institutions, and therefore it should be easier for us to understand that we are seeking something that will be the outcome of a learning process, not just a vote. So for our team at the University of California, it was a matter of changing the way we thought about risk and about the kind of environmental sustainability, social responsibility, and governance issues, ESG, that our stakeholders bring before us. So whereas our stakeholders tend to think about sustainability from a values perspective, we approach sustainability both from a risk management perspective and from an opportunity perspective. Part of the intentional strategy of the University of California Investment Office is to ensure that our due diligence process is holistically evaluating ESG factors in our investment decision-making process. The other part is making sure that we have access to the right investment opportunities to actively bring about reductions in greenhouse gas emissions in the real world and to promote sustainable business practices. Because sustainable investing will grow out of a learning process, the first step is to map out your goals. First and foremost, the process must begin with studying the issue and then thinking about what value it can bring to your operation. This is how we began at the UC. We embarked on the journey to learn by listening to our stakeholders, all our stakeholders, and hearing their views. Comparing the experiences of other peer organizations, including joining networks like the IEN, the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investing, Series, Carbon Disclosure Project, and a variety of other peer organizations. And of course, ensuring that we consulted with a variety of the world and thought leaders that you would consider household names in this conversation to embrace their ideas as well as we thought about what we should do. In our case, what I found was that the knowledge of our own faculty, our own staff, our own students were essential resources to helping my investment office think through how best to integrate sustainability at the University of California. As a cultural shift, I wanted a process that fit hand in glove with the unique, innovative, and progressive educational culture at the University of California. So then, now that you've heard your stakeholders, you've figured out what your goals are, you've tried to align yourself with the leadership of the institution, the next step was to develop a written framework to define how we would consider sustainability in our investment evaluation process and to guide implementation. Sounds simple, takes time, and needs to be a very inclusive process, because that's how you can get all the learning from everyone else I've just described to you put down on paper. And if you're going to shift a culture, you need to be clear about what culture it is you want to build. And it's much easier to have it written down and let everybody read it over and over again so it becomes the way you do things, as opposed to having to listen people describe it to you every single day. We published our framework for sustainable investing just about a year ago. In fact, almost exactly to the year, September 15th last year, I presented that framework to the Board of Regents at the University of California, and exactly September 15th of this year, I will be going back talking about a variety of things, reporting on the progress we've made on that framework. Drafts of the framework were circulated well in advance to our launch for comment and input to faculty leadership, to our Board of Regents, including student representatives, to world-class experts in the field, to our own administration, and to our own university sustainability office. We cast the net wide for input to ensure that the framework development process was viewed and certainly inclusive. The next step was to fine-tune a process to implement the framework and to communicate that process clearly across all of our stakeholder groups. We created sustainability investing pages as part of our Office of the CIO website. We reviewed all of our procedures to include sustainability, including updating our proxy voting policy, creating a better process to monitor exclusions for our portfolio investments, more clearly communicating to student groups the defined process to bring forward calls and recommendations for divestment, and then studying how best to participate in corporate shareholder engagement. Inside the office, we added ESG risk analysis explicitly to our due diligence process across all asset classes. And one of the contexts under which the University of California adopted our framework was the tremendous passion at the UC to lead on solutions to climate change, including calls for UC to divest from all of its fossil fuel holdings. When I came to the UC 3 years ago, I was inspired, but at the same time concerned about this call for divestment. Let me pause and share with you for a moment. In fact, I know in the job interview they asked me this question multiple times. I came from Alberta. It wasn't exactly something I was focusing on, considering I was moving from the oil sands into California. But when I got on the job, I realized how important this issue was, and I quickly had to figure out what we were going to do about it. And I have to tell you, honestly, I had spent little or no time thinking about this issue in anything I'd done previously leading up to my job here. And I remember very clearly in a couple of the conversations I had very early on with people across the university, and some of my peers from leading Ivy League endowments, who advised my board members to pass the message on to me. And the message was simply, I should just get out of the way. I should actually forget about dealing with this issue. I should pass it over to the board and then let them deal with it and let a task force just tell me what to do. I had that choice. I didn't think it made a lot of sense. Frankly, I thought this is going to be an important topic. I'd rather get involved and figure out what we're going to do about it and learn in the process as opposed to have somebody. And eventually I'd have to do a lot of the work anyways because people would then call upon me and my team and say, give us the facts. I figured if we were going to share the facts, we might as well learn what they were ourselves to be able to embrace them and then communicate them to others. So that was kind of how it all started a couple of years ago. And from that point, we are here today, not because I've had any personal strong views coming into this job about sustainability. I can truly tell you that it has come from a product of being part of the University of California and learning from the system that I'm part of. So all these things that we've described to you, to me, divestment as an issue seemed like such an indirect and insufficient manner to address the climate change facing the planet. Rather, I asked myself, what does this challenge mean in real terms? For me as an investment professionals care about concrete results. I know you've had all kinds of questions asked today about, does this make money? Is it really profitable? These are the types of questions we are trained to ask when we are presented with investment opportunities, and they're the right questions. But I came to believe personally through this journey that the future is going to be different than the past. And our investments would therefore need to reflect that. At the UC, we've taken a number of actions on climate risk, not only to reduce our risk, but also to tap real-world opportunities to support the goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by investing in the infrastructure and technologies that will accomplish it. So what does that mean? Let's step back. Global GDP, many, many, many trillions of dollars. 11% of global GDP is energy and energy-related services. So 5 trillion approximately, 6 trillion approximately, maybe less now, is the energy commodity itself. And another 5 trillion would be energy-related services. So if 11% of global GDP is energy and energy-related services, let's now bring it back home. We manage $100 billion. We don't have to get too cute about this. Roughly 10 to 11% of our portfolio is energy and energy-related services. So when you ask us to divest, we're not going to hide behind a definition of, a very narrow slice of coal companies. We have to embrace this question fundamentally as it relates to 10 to 11% of the portfolio. And that's what's different about asking someone to get out of energy or fossil fuels. So in that context, and for the UC as a system, and for our particular problem set or opportunity set, we made a couple of commitments. We said we would certainly pay attention to thinking about this issue because we had to. We didn't have a choice. It doesn't matter. In fact, we thank the students for bringing the issue to the table. Because if they wouldn't have, I probably would have had 100 different things to do in my first 90, 100, 3 years of being in the organization. This went right to the top. So we appreciated that kind of sensitivity and urgency that was brought to the issue. Not a bad time for them to bring the issue up because everybody in the world has been talking about the same thing. But we went ahead and made a couple of other commitments. We made a $1 billion commitment to invest in climate solutions between 2014 and 2020. We became an active participant in UC's efforts to reach the climate neutrality goal by 2025 and became an active member of the Climate Leadership Council. Internally, we've adopted a climate change risk assessment modeling framework for use in assessing opportunities in private equity, real estate, and real assets. And then my office became the first and the largest founder of a not-for-profit organization called the Aligned Intermediary that we designed in partnership with the White House to increase flow of private, for-profit capital from long-term investors into climate infrastructure transactions, such as clean energy, water infrastructure, and waste to value. We chair this organization at this point, and we have 5 other peers that work with us and collectively committed, we committed $500 million to this entity, but they've collectively committed more than us. And in totality, it's about a couple of $1 billion for these types of climate infrastructure solutions. We realized these types of opportunities would be interesting, but more later stage in the evolution, developed, lesser technology risk, potentially. And there is a good opportunity set in the earlier stage innovation engine that we have either heard about in the context of Clean Tech 1.0 or potentially Clean Energy 2.0. So at COP21, last December, Bill Gates announced the Breakthrough Energy Partnership. There are 27 signatories, individuals, high net worth individuals, like Bill Gates, as part of this coalition. And the University of California signed on to be the first and at this point the only institutional investor as part of the Breakthrough Energy Coalition to help create a dedicated fund in which Bill Gates and the 27 other individuals and ourselves will invest in opportunities at the earlier stages. We're working with the Bill Gates team to actually help design this fund. Through these types of energy and climate change-related activities, I think we've been able to help support the university's climate change leadership agenda. But because of the visibility that we have gained, not intentionally, I mean, these are some of the things we wanted to do as broadening out our opportunity set, it's helped bring to our office, as you would imagine, a wide array of new energy investment opportunities and partnerships that will position our portfolio for future growth. So we've actually seen a lot of good stuff that's out there. Now, to get to the really good stuff, you have to go through a lot of stuff. But the reality is, it may be at the nascent stages today. 10 years from now, I think you're going to be seeing a lot more. You got to get started on this at some point. Our next step in this process is to reevaluate our real assets strategy, including reassessing energy holdings in our portfolio to consider changes in overall economic conditions, shifting commodity markets, climate change risk, and other emerging ESG risk factors. In fact, I mentioned to my colleague from Saudi Arabia that if the largest producer of oil and gas in the world makes a decision to, I guess, take Saudi Aramco public, naively, I would imagine there has to be a view that the price of the commodity in the ground today is worth more than it's going to be 30 to 40 years from now. It means we need to ask ourselves some basic questions about the commodity and the traditional assets that we all think about. So over the past year, we've been assessing the material risks to our portfolio from ESG factors. We've sold all of our holdings in coal mining, oil sands focused companies, and somewhat unrelated, but also part of the sustainability framework, public equities of private prison companies in the United States that operate here. We've also further, over the course of the last year, reduced our oil and gas holdings in private assets by another $200 million. We believe it is necessary to position the portfolio to be more consistent with the energy transition expected in the coming decades, while still accessing today's opportunities to bring about the more robust returns. I'm sure you're all wondering, what are these more robust returns? And I'm happy to take some questions at the end, but we can have that conversation. That requires us to reevaluate what our goals are for real assets portfolio and to consider whether prior strategies still make sense in the light of current market conditions. So that's the biggest question, right? What are these opportunities? And I would say if you're an endowment, we all invest, or a pension plan for that matter, we all invest in something called natural resources or real assets. They're just part and parcel of the portfolio. And one prominent idea from the past is that real assets provide a form of inflation insurance for other assets in the overall portfolio. Over long time horizons, 5, 10, 20 years, common wisdom was that real estate and energy commodities are particularly attractive in this regard to provide this kind of inflation insurance in your portfolio. But portfolio managers also think about real assets as a way to generate income and improving the performance during times when financial assets might not be offering robust growth. The prevailing assumption is that portfolio managers can count on the real assets portfolio to bring uncorrelated double-digit appreciation even when other markets are declining. I mean, this is the sales pitch you've seen every time you look at a presentation on real assets. Now, at the very least, so the theory goes. Real assets, wisely managed, will be income producing and hold their value over time. But now I think it is incumbent upon us to ask ourselves if real assets investing is still reducing the risks that it was set out to address. Inflation, for example, is expected to remain low in Western markets for the foreseeable future. Yet portfolio managers are still maintaining the same appetite for inflation hedging positions in real estate and energy. We have to ask ourselves as portfolio managers, if there is low inflation, does this strategy still make sense? Energy commodity prices have collapsed by 50%, and the losses in resource benchmarks in 2015, they're frighteningly real. The MSCI index, one measure for world natural resources, a benchmark, shed 23% last year versus gains of 7% from 2005 to 2010. We all know commodities like oil and gas tend to suffer from boom and bust cycles. But it is now appropriate to think through how durable the recent collapse in oil prices will be. In the United States and Europe, where one could argue inflation is not a priority, active risk that we're managing today, what elements of real assets investments still make sense? Do we need a hedge against inflation? If not, what are the sustained goals that drive us to invest in real assets? If we are seeking appreciation, are some assets better than others in terms of appreciation potential? To me, the answers to these questions require a different risk framework than those we have used in the past. My experience, and this is where my journey on sustainability has enlightened me. To construct a successful real assets portfolio in the future, we will need to consider several things. First of all, do we feel confident of our internal long-range financial views? Secondly, are we sufficiently cognizant of social, environmental, and demographic trends that might influence real assets, both in the short and the long-time scale? Let me give you some concrete examples of what I mean. For assets like real estate, changing demographic trends will be salient. In societies where populations are declining, is real estate appreciation a given? And what about the long-term impacts of climate change on infrastructure, energy, and agricultural land? When I think about sustainable investing, I think about these questions. When I think about my own real asset strategy, I think about these same questions. And that's my key learning. It's a part and parcel of the same fundamental financial decision-making that we all are expected to do, that we all call our fiduciary responsibility today. To me, when I think about ESG, I realize I need to recognize there are real risks I need to consider, and they need to be assessed using a systematic evaluation process. There's no question in my mind that decision-making about real assets, given their long holdings duration, should include ESG considerations. And more specifically, I believe our real assets portfolio needs investments that hedge against ongoing climate risk. It's not a moral decision per se. It's a sensible investing decision. So in summary, at the University of California, sustainable investing is not a checklist item. It's a cultural shift. It's a new way to think about the purpose of different asset classes and how best to meet the targets set for those asset classes in light of changing factors like climate change, migration, income inequality, shifting demographics, and diversity. We cannot blindly keep investing on theories put forth in the early 90s or during the commodity supercycle that characterized the last decade. We need to adjust to the fact that ESG factors are changing the future of investing and the strategies needed to ensure robust returns. I humbly urge you to consider sustainability intentionally in this light and to resist the temptation to just close your eyes to the opportunities that can be created in analyzing these issues systematically. The end goal should not be to appease activists. It should be to analyze how to invest wisely in a changing world where environmental, social, and governance issues will be judged very differently than a decade ago and impact value potentially in large and material ways. Thank you very much, and I look forward to taking any questions.